taking you through this introduction um, for this presentation. So here we are. So just a couple quick housekeeping items for this webinar. We are recording this webinar and it will be posted on our website at www.farmfreshfoodbox.org within the next week. Everyone in terms of attendees are muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box, which is in the little remote section of your Zoom panel, and Q&A will be taken at the end. And just so you know, if you are sending a chat, everyone will be able to see your chats. So right now, sit back and enjoy, and we are happy to see you here. So just a quick bit about our project team. This is our project team. We are a team of 8. Dr. Jane Kolodinsky at the University of Vermont is our principal investigator. Marilyn Sittaker is our co-project director at the Evergreen State University. We have Lisa Chase with us as well, who is a co-principal investigator from UVM Cooperative Extension. And our extension agents are Julia Van Zolen Kim, Hans Estrin, and Diane Smith, and they are in California, Vermont, and Washington State, respectively. Again, my name is Wei Wei. I'm the project manager at the University of Vermont. And unable to join us today, but a huge part of our study was Lauren Greco, who is the graduate research assistant at the University of Vermont. So the contents today, we will be going through a little overview about the problems and solutions led by Hans Estrin. Then Marilyn Sittaker will take you through our national market survey. Diane Smith will talk about the Farm Fresh Food Box model itself, and then I will be talking about results of data from 2 seasons, and we will take Q&A at the end. So with that, I will hand it over to Hans Estrin, who will start us off.
Great, thank you, Wei Wei. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. And let's start by going back 7 years to October 2012. And at that point, I was working distributing food through a local, very micro-local truck that delivered from farms to schools and hospitals. And one of the farmers I worked with, Howie Prusek, shown here coming out of one of his boxes of produce, had an amazing year growing squash. He had like unbelievable, coming out of his ears, butternut squash. And he also, you know, had a little farm market and did some sales to Hannaford and stuff, but, you know, he's always living on the edge, trying to make a living. So he had a problem. He couldn't move his squash. Next slide. And we got to talking, you know, and at the same time, right down the road, are consumers, and actually in the town I live in, who would go down to the general store and they couldn't find very good produce. You know, they had to go in, drive 15 miles to the grocery store. Next slide. And we got to talking and just came up with this idea. Howie was not a CSA farmer, but I was picking up with this produce truck, refrigerated produce truck, right from his doorstep. And I said, hey, Howie, why don't you put together some sort of box and I'll offer it out to this network, both the schools, but anyone else I can think of. And so this is what Howie came up with. It was it was, I think, election season, and it was kind of crazy. And so he came up with this survival pack idea, and there's that original flyer. It was moving a lot of squash, 20 pounds of it, and a lot of other things he threw in. And I just put it out, and he sold over $2,000 worth of these boxes without much effort. And they were delivered to the general store and a couple other pickup places. So that was kind of a solution for his problem. Next slide. I got scratching my head on this and just thinking, you know, here we are. There's sort of part of a bigger trend in the country. And actually ran into Jane Kolodinsky, the project director, and we started thinking a little bit more about this together. And, you know, basically this is stuff that all of you listening know. You know, we really, since World War II industrialization, moved towards large centralized farms, really selling at low volumes, really perishable product. and they're moving stuff all over the country. Big chains can pick it up. They can buy huge amounts and move big amounts of food and at low prices. And all the marketing is sort of moved towards convenience foods, really dominating scratch cooking. And in some ways we sort of forgot how to work with real food. And in the meantime, it's becoming harder and harder for consumers to really access this produce, even from farmers right down the road, because the market isn't there. Of course, along comes farmers markets, direct market, all of that stuff, CSAs, and those really boomed, but they've also plateaued the last 10 years. And growers are really looking for ways to expand their retail markets for local, and consumers, I don't even know about consumers. Next slide. So, we were thinking about this food box thing and thinking, wow, this might be a good model to try out. A lot of farmers are CSA farmers. They're used to packing boxes, but what about delivering them in a different way? So thinking about consumers, I wonder, we're thinking, what do they really want? And it arrives to me that really consumers right now are schizophrenic. And this woman right here she looks normal, but I think she's schizophrenic. And what's going on is that all the market and the culture is telling her, oh my God, it's so good to have convenience food and ease, and yet there's some longing. She wants to put this fresh food in her, she wants to buy from local farms. So that's where we got to this idea of, wow, if we're going to do this, we really need to figure out what consumers are after and try to come up with some kind of marketing that matches that. So I'm going to hand it off here to Marilyn, who really helped direct that whole part of the project of looking and asking consumers what they're really wanting. So Marilyn, to you.
Here I am. Hopefully Weiwei's unmuted me, and we'll go to the next slide. So I think it's useful to start by putting direct-to-consumer marketing in context. As we know, in 2017, over 2 million farms were generating $388 billion in agricultural sales. But we know that direct markets were a relatively small portion of that. If you combine direct-to-consumer, which refers to farmers markets, CSAs, UPIC, farm stands, and intermediated markets, which includes direct farm sales to food hubs, retailers, restaurants, schools, and other institutions. Those sales were only responsible for about 3% of all agricultural sales, and they represented about 8% of all the farms. Moving down to the table, you can see that in 2017, intermediated sales generated about $9 billion, and direct-to-consumer sales generated about $2.8 billion. And that means that intermediated sales outperformed direct sales by 3 to 1. Now, we know that the intermediated sales came from a relatively modest amount of farms, 28,000. And there were almost 4 times as many direct-to-consumer farms. So if you do the math, you can see that intermediated sales, those farms doing intermediated sales were generating an order of magnitude much higher average sales per farm, about 312,000 compared to 21,000. Next slide. As far as
through direct-to-consumer channels grown rapidly from 404 million in 1992 to 1,200 million.
Oh, we've got too many talkers here. So for this slide, as Hans alluded to, our previous trends over the past couple decades has really been dramatic growth in direct sales nationally. But more recently, between 2002 and 2007, we had about a 32% increase in sales, and the number of farms increased by about 17%. But in the subsequent period, 2007 to 2012, the the sales really flattened out and the number of farms grew by only 5%. You can see in the more recent period, 2012 to 2017, the number of farms is actually decreasing, and we don't have comparable sales data. Next slide, please.
In 2007.
Marilyn, this is Lisa. Can I jump in with a quick question?
Agricultural sales growth.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so basically we took a look at these data, and we knew that reaching out to new market segments is one strategy for producers to maintain or grow their business. They need to know who these untapped markets are, who the consumers are, and adjust their operations and outreach efforts accordingly. So basically, we felt that it was important for us to do a study to know who shops for locally grown foods, what their reason is, so that we could give this information to producers and help push against the growing trends. The objectives of the study were to discover where U.S. consumers shop for produce, what the regional variations are in shopping patterns, whether they seek out locally grown foods and how often, their attitudes and preferences regarding local foods generally, and specifically what their attitudes are about specific direct venues. Next slide, please. So we asked people where they shop for fresh produce, and we asked them to choose as many categories as apply. We asked them where they had shopped ever in the past. Those are the orange bars, and also in the past month, and those are the blue bars. So together, we came up with a lifetime experience of where people shopped. Not surprisingly, people most frequently shopped at supermarkets. Almost everybody had shopped at supermarkets. But surprisingly, we found that a high proportion of people had shopped at farmers markets. And indeed, if we totaled the unduplicated counts of shopping at any direct venue, we found that 79.5% of our sample had shopped at one time in a direct-to-consumer venue. And just to keep in mind that this is coming from a nationally representative sample, we had about 400 people who participated in this survey. So this gives us a good idea of what the current situation is. Obviously, farmers markets were the most popular, followed by farm stands, U-Pick, farm boxes, and CSAs. And as Hans alluded to, a farm fresh food or a food box, we're defining here as a bulk box of fresh produce purchased directly from the farm. Okay, next slide, please. We asked people how many different venues they had shopped. About 29% of respondents said they had purchased fresh produce from just one direct venue, 45% from 2 different venues, and 5 from 3 or more. We also asked them how frequently they shopped for locally grown food, and about half said they bought it either often or always. So that demonstrates the popularity for locally grown fresh produce. Next slide, please. Regarding regional variations in direct-to-consumer shopping, we can see that the Northeast had the highest proportion of people who had shopped through direct venues, and the West had the lowest, and there was quite a bit of difference between the two. We also found that the West was much lower in compared to the Midwest and the Northeast in farmers market use, and much lower than the South comparatively regarding farm stand use. But there was no difference in the prevalence of shopping at CSA venues. Going to the next slide, please. We asked them why they like buying locally grown produce. And the top reasons, which has been demonstrated in other research, is that people like to shop for local food because of the quality of the produce. They like that it's fresh and flavorful. They feel that the food is wholesome and has high nutritional quality. But in addition, people were very strongly motivated by social and economic concerns. They wanted to support local farmers. They believed in the alternative food system. They wanted to support the local economy. less frequently cited reasons were the affordability and convenience of shopping for locally grown food, which is kind of nice to know that those attitudes are out there among people who do have that experience. They also were motivated by their belief that locally grown food did not contain any chemicals or pathogens, that they were grown using sustainable farming practices. They liked that it was certified organic, and they, to a lesser extent, felt that the farm workers were treated fairly. Now, I also want to tell you that about 14% of the people in our sample said that they've never bought locally grown food, and we asked them, well, why not? About half of them said that their reason for not buying locally grown food is that they want the freedom to be able to buy what they like year-round. About 42% said they perceived it to be too expensive. About 41% said the hours are not convenient. So those are some of the reasons people did not like or did not want to experience buying locally grown produce. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next presenter. I think Diane is up next.
Oh, thank you, Marilyn. This is Diane. I'll be sharing the components of this direct-to-consumer model, which has been likened to a modified CSA subscription with a variation that the customer is able to choose to buy a weekly produce box after seeing what the contents will be. So the customers still have to pay upfront, but on a weekly basis rather than signing up for a full season's subscription. This next slide looks, oh, it's not good. Okay, let me get closer to my microphone. See if this doesn't improve. Let me see. I'm going to try and increase the volume to see if that helps. So is this a little bit better as far as the volume goes? Better, thank you. Okay. So we have 3 priority partners that we focused on with this direct-to-consumer model. The first was the small farmer. The second, the small independent rural retailer. And the third was the customer or the community served by that retailer. In this next slide, the characteristics of the farms participating in this model were organized around proprietary partnerships, and they were not operated by hired managers. The farmers were recruited to participate in this research project in different ways. It really was based on a lot of the relationships that had been established, personal knowledge of the farmers in the communities where the project was piloted, and then different strategies to let the farmers know that this was an opportunity that they may want to engage in, included a blanket email invite, which was sent out and followed by a self-selection process by the farmers. And this was based on their particular interest and motivation to try the model. Drawing on the extension faculty's understanding of market innovators, personal follow-up invites were made and initiated. And this established a cohort of farmers to participate. For myself personally, I spoke with colleagues at my extension office to identify potential farmers who might be interested in testing this concept and participate in the research project. I contacted 2 farmers that I had been working with and explained what the project was. And then a 3rd farmer was referred to me by one of the farmers that I initially met with. Each of the farmers that we worked with had sales in direct-to-consumer venues already. Some had the CSA subscription. They participated in a weekly farmers market. They had on-farm food stands. And 2 of the farmers that I worked with had established farm-to-institution venues and markets, including selling to a small local school district, as well as selling at local restaurants. In California, extension faculty there announced the project through a word of mouth using social media and listserv postings, and using farm-centric events to make the announcements, to get the word out that this was an opportunity that they may be interested in pursuing, and then extended personal invitations for those who might be interested in the project. I think the strategies used to recruit farmers really point to the value of relationships. These were fostered on a one-to-one and joint conversations with numerous farmers and retail payers. And it was important in creating a workable agreement. In several occasions, we got very close to a working model on multiple occasions, but sometimes it just didn't get off the ground. And some of them fell apart. These farmer retailer roles fell apart because expectations were not realized. In many cases, it was a key player, either a farmer or a retailer, that solidified the partnership, serving as a driving catalyst, creating a match between the project, the partners, and the CSA farmers. In this farmer role, the farmer agreed to offer a weekly box for sale at the partners' retailers for a specific price. The farmer identified what produce would be harvested and provided a listing of the produce for the upcoming week. The schedule typically was that by Friday afternoon, the farmer contacted the retailer with a list of foods that would be in the upcoming box. Then the retailer would would collect orders during the weekend, and then on Monday afternoon, contact the farmer to let them know how many boxes were being ordered. The farmer would harvest on Tuesday and deliver on Wednesday. This photo here is of Footbrook Farm. Let's see, the next slide looks at the retailer role. The retailers for this project were recruited through cold calling by stopping by at rural grocery stores or small businesses and talking with owners or managers to promote the project. The rural retailers typically do not carry the fresh produce or a large selection of produce, and so they were a priority since we did not want to compete with a large with stores that were already selling produce. Small rural grocery stores were one of the partners. We had some other less traditional locations, which included a gas station with a mini mart, a bakery, and a taqueria. In conversations with the retailer, they expressed interest in this project because they felt they would be serving the community, supporting the local farmer, and then they also recognized the value of increased foot traffic for their store. In each store, the retailer had a dry erase board, which was part of the project, and this was used to list the upcoming box contents. The list was updated weekly, typically by the store owner, but on occasion by the farmer, and then customers would come in to the store, see what was in the upcoming box, and decide to place and pay for the order in advance. The retailer accepted the payment, in some cases a cash transaction, and others a debit or credit card. Since the food was paid for in advance, food stamp EBTs could not be used for a pre-purchase box. Tracking tools for the customer information were designed by extension and research team and included the customer's name and contact information, just in case the customer didn't come for the box, and also to confirm sales. Communication between the farmer and the retailer on a weekly box contents and the number of boxes to order was through a variety of channels, including the phone, text messaging, or stopping by the store to exchange the information. When the farmer dropped off the pre-ordered box, the retailer gave them the collected receipts or the money. Usually the farmer was paid in cash. There was not a problem with unclaimed boxes, but on one occasion, an order to the farmer was not accurate, and one unpaid box was delivered to a customer. This incident was resolved with the project paying for the box, and this really highlighted the importance of staff training. As a result, an instructional sheet and other tools were developed for staff training to accept payment, documenting the sales, and notifying the farmer receiving the box. Boxes were dropped off by the farmer on a specific day, and in most cases it was a Wednesday, and the customer had a time window in which to pick up the box. This is similar to the CSA drop, and many of the farmers and some of the customers were accustomed to. There was no additional cold storage required, though some retailers did have walk-in refrigerators that held the boxes until they were picked up. Customers pre-ordered the box, paid the retailer in advance, and the retailer would notify the farmer on the number of boxes ordered, typically on Monday for Tuesday harvest and Wednesday delivery. The retailers were asked to pick up. The retailers basically were being asked to be the pickup point for the produce box for the local farmer. Typically, the store owner did not know or already have a relationship with the farmer. So as part of this project, retailers were given, developed a relationship with the farmer, and the retailers were also given 10% of the total box sales for their efforts. To sustain this model over the long term, the farmer and the retailer will need to establish a fair price for the retailer to handle the box sales. This photo is of Sheila Lord out of the Waterville Market in Vermont. The next slide highlights the customer or the consumer's role. To get the word out and to generate business, Extension faculty created a market campaign that included a Facebook page, flyers, handbills, specific community, directed to the specific community served. We published articles in the newspaper to promote the program in the targeted or local community. We sent out promotional mailers to specific zip codes, and we conducted surveys at the stores to find out interest, and we also provided some taste tests of local produce during that survey collection period to promote the program. Customers came to the store each week, typically as part of the routine, like driving by the store on their way to another destination, and they would check the board, see what was being offered, and they would prepay for the box and return to the store later that same week to pick it up. The thought was that they might also purchase, from the retailer standpoint, the thought was that they might purchase additional items at the store when picking up and ordering the box. This photo here is of the Waterville Market, and the pair is Footbrook Farms, and this is the whiteboard that is posted in each of the retailers. The next slide presents the role of the extension faculty. Here's a picture. Oh, we have the wrong picture. Okay, well, that picture should be of the research and extension team. You saw the players in an earlier slide. Extension faculty in each county where the program was piloted played a matchmaker role, if you would, between the farmer and the retailer. The first meeting, first we met individually with the partner pairs to explain the program as well as their role in the project, and then we designed a meeting where they could both meet, introduce the farmer and the retailer, and establish a shared understanding of how it would play out. In every pairing, there were nuances to how the program was implemented. The best match really came from when the retailer was located along the usual route of the farmer. For example, one farmer was located just about a half mile from the retailer that they were paired with, and after a few weeks, a routine was established and sales went very smoothly. However, in another location, which was outside of the regular travel pattern for the farmer, it was more burdensome to make deliveries, especially when the orders were small. Extension faculty met with the retailer to clarify questions about tracking, which was part of the study, and also to troubleshoot things that came up. In one instance, the farmer was not able to update the board for the weekly basis, were unable to contact the retailer, and so the extension faculty was able to drop by the retailers and update the board with next week's listing. Extension faculty developed instruction sheets, as I mentioned earlier, for the retailer staff, and we did provide staff training, answering questions, and even sometimes providing information about the product in the boxes. One of the retailer staff in my community was unfamiliar with many of the products, in particular kohlrabi, and some of the different greens, kale, chard, and bok choy. So one of those unexpected benefits was informing even the retailers of the produce grown locally and seasonally. Extension faculty developed outreach marketing materials and promoted the program through word of mouth, newspaper articles. We presented on radio shows, posted weekly produce offerings on Facebook, and sometimes included recipes of the feature items within the box. Next, Weiwei will share information about the research findings.
Thank you, Diane. Again, my name is Weiwei. I'm out of UVM, and I will be presenting some of the postseason research findings. So we had a lot of data for this project, but today I will be talking about the purchaser survey and the farmer and retailer postseason interview, which also incorporated the demographic survey of the farmers and retailers, which I'll briefly touch on, but mostly we'll be focusing on the purchaser survey and the postseason interview for the farmers and retailers. So starting off with the purchaser survey, the purchaser surveys were implemented during the food box season. Surveys were given to the farmers to place into the box, which could be returned to the store during the following pickup. In the second season, all the locations were also provided with pre-stamped envelopes, so the customers could send the surveys back directly to their respective extension offices. So as you can see, the second year, it worked out really well. We got a lot more responses in 2018. But generally, the demographics for the purchasers were older couples. The average age was 58. The respondents were primarily white women of a higher income level. And so what encouraged shoppers to try? I made this little word cloud based on some of the open responses we received back from the consumers. And generally, they love the quality and the freshness of the produce that was offered in the box. A lot of the stores might have had, or some of the stores might have had produce, but not at the quality that was offered in the box. People love the ability to order as needed and not be bound to a strict weekly pickup routine. Many people discovered new vegetables through this process, as Diane already talked about, whether it was the consumers or the retailers. Convenience was also a big factor for purchasers. The hours were convenient for pickup, and having local stores carry the boxes helped to increase the purchases. And also people like knowing that they were supporting their local farmers. That was a big factor in why they were purchasing too. And what discouraged people from buying? As you can see from the word cloud, the big one was nothing. But there were other factors. So for example, excuse me, the quantity of the items in the box were not necessarily sufficient to feed the number of people in the home. Along with that, people were somewhat dismayed by the price to the quantity of some of the boxes, stating the cost was more than they wanted to pay. Shoppers also wanted to see recipes, at least in the first year of this process, and so that they could understand how to use it, as Diane also mentioned. And distance was also a factor as to what discouraged shoppers to try. There was one purchaser in particular who had purchased one or two and really loved it, but once her employment in the town ended, she didn't want to drive the 30+ minutes from her home to the store to pick up the veggies. So those were some of the factors that were encouraging and discouraging shoppers to buy, and that's helped. The 2017 surveys in particular helped us think about, what can we change and help the farmers and retailers to change to kind of help along the sales. And this is where I'll get into the postseason and demographic surveys. So as you can see from this table, this is the number of retailers and farmers who participated in 2017 and 2018. Please note that in California, there were no participants in 2017, primarily due to the severe wildfires that were happening in Mendocino County in that area at the time. So in 2017, we had a total of 6 farms and 6 retailers in Washington and Vermont altogether. And then in 2018, we had one farm in California that sold to 3 retailers, and then we had a one-to-one matchup in Washington and Vermont. Apologies. So what did we learn from the postseason surveys? So farmers were all very enthusiastic to participate in the process. Many did so, like Diane said, they wanted a greater connection with their community, to increase access to quality produce to their neighbors, and also to broaden their consumer base. After the process, during the process, farmers got exposure within their nearby communities, particularly for their CSAs. In the first year, we achieved this with flyers, like Diane had said, Facebook posts, sandwich boards. And since most farms were CSA-based, they saw the food box model as a way to gradually introduce customers to the concept of CSA without having to pay the lump sum. Farmers did, though, find that the lack of direct connections and the direct relationship with their consumers that they were used to was difficult to manage. And in 2018, some farms visited the stores, like Diane had said. We did some store visits, or they did store visits, and also there were some taste tests at the stores to help build that initial relationship. Retailers also saw more foot traffic coming into their stores, and at least one retailer increased the stock of their fresh fruit in the store because of the newly built relationship with the farmer. This particular retailer said that he had always wanted to increase his fresh fruit stock and wanted to work with the farmer, and this was a great way to introduce that more to his customers. And just a little snippet here. This is a little video I'll play for you right now. It's a quote from one of our California farmers about his experience with his retailers.
I guess for some of those people, you know, just having it all put together in the box and in the store where they're going anyway, maybe was convenient, but I know there was at least one person that I talked with who was getting the box that said they were actually getting it about every week.
That cut off, but it was every week. Some more of what we learned. So notable in 2017 was the types of relationships between the farmer and the retailer, as Diane had previously mentioned. So in 2017, Exchange had worked to find nearby retailers for the farmers who were interested in the model. However, this meant that either the partner was less engaged in the model and therefore in the entire process, which was frustrating to one or both of the partners. It also often meant lack of communication or simply lack of ownership in the particular steps of the process that each had to take. So in 2018, excuse me, Extension made more of a concerted effort in some of the sites for farmers to search for farmers who already had established relationships with a store owner, whether it was already personal or working. And Extension also spent more time in person with the partners together, which helped to increase the feelings of ownership in the process, which is more reflected in the interviews and the postseason survey. So if you can see on the left side of the screen, there's a Washington farmer who said, I don't think they were, it seems like they weren't as, I don't know if excited is the right word, but there wasn't a lot of marketing on their end. And so that kind of goes into the whole first year experience where there was a lack of communication and lack of ownership felt from the farmer, felt by the farmer on the side of the retailer. So that was greatly improved. So the communication and marketing was greatly improved as a result of building more of this relationship, because retailers found they had a greater investment in the welfare of the farm and also in the program. And so they were more likely to put up flyers, they were more likely to post or to talk about the model with the customers. And sometimes this wasn't the case too, I should mention, because retailers are very busy. We realize that, especially throughout this entire process. But there was a greater desire to be helpful in this process. So in 2018, as Diane mentioned, we also added to our marketing efforts by including a direct mailer, which was sent to local zip codes or to the local community. And this really helped to increase interest and sales of the box temporarily, but the partners would see a dip in sales after about 2 or 3 weeks after the marketing went out. And so as you can see on the right side, the quote from the California retailer, we had a newspaper article and mailings that went out the same week. So there was a huge jump in people doing it. And then it took about 3 or 4 weeks for almost all of them to forget about it again. So that was a huge factor for us in the second year, realizing, okay, marketing has to be put out on a regular basis. So, and then as Diane mentioned, in both years, we were not able to accept SNAP EBT due to the nature of the system. And this is something that both farmers and retailers were very interested in providing for their customers. So just some of the main takeaways for today, and you'll be able to see more if you join us for the short course, is that there is a great willingness to try on the side of both the farmers and the retailers, but especially in terms of trying to reach new consumers. But most retailers and farmers needed to be helped through that process, at least through the initial setup phase. And that's where extension was of great help. And that also helps to build the commitment and ownership for the model. That is something that is very important to this model. There needs to be buy-in from both sides in order for it to be more successful. And it's important to note that in each of the sites, the system was adapted, the strategy was adapted to the needs of both the partners, and farmers and retailers who were more willing to adapt to their needs were more successful. And of course, communication and connection between the partners is essential to the success. And like I was saying, marketing, putting marketing out there as frequently as possible. So the regular notification going out to the communities is really important. But it's also important to keep the steps simple because, as we all know, farmers and retailers are extremely busy people. And for myself, I didn't realize how busy retailers are all the time. So it is important to be mindful to keep everything really simple for them, just in terms of the number of steps that they need to go through in order to put this all together. And then finally, I think this is something that maybe is more of a policy issue, but making SNAP EBT accessible in this kind of a scenario is really important. And so those are the main takeaways. I think this also leaves us time for questions. But first, I'd like to make the acknowledgements. So this project was supported by the USDA NIFA grant for the Innovation for Rural Entrepreneurs and Communities project. And of course, UVM, the Evergreen State College, UC System, and WSU. And I think now we can take questions. So if all of the panelists wouldn't mind muting, or unmuting, I'm sorry.
This is Lisa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, we have 2 questions already. One is in the Q&A and one's in the chat. I'll start with the Q&A and we can answer it live and any panelist can jump in and answer it. Wondering about software platforms to manage customers, keep them engaged, and help with inventory. Is all this work put on the retailer? Any recommendations on web-based platforms? Also, how did customers have choice of what is in the box besides just basing their purchase of that week's current offerings? So we've got a few questions right there, and I'll just open it up to any of the panelists to jump in and answer.
I could jump in and maybe others could join me, but I'm sorry about the audio here. Hopefully you can all hear me well enough. So I did type an answer there, but a web-based platform was an obvious thing that we started to get into and think about. And one farm in particular, this idea of a virtual a farm stand, right in the retail store or in a section, maybe on like an iPad or something like that that's dedicated. Is something that at least one of the farms really wants to try. I think it's really going to be an essential and important next step to go in that route. I mean, that's my personal feeling, because the retailer has a lot of balls in the air, and it's hard for them to manage something like this and not take a big cut for their time. So the short answer is software is already developed for stuff like this. And really, it's something that I'm looking forward to in the next year or so, working with some farms to, as they try this stuff on their own to experiment with.
And then the second part of the question was, how did customers have choice of what is in the box besides just basing their purchase off of that week's current offerings? The short answer is, in most cases, they didn't have choice. The box was advertised, showing what was in it, but the customer couldn't customize the box. They either could choose to purchase it or not.
There are some exceptions to that. However, with a couple of the farms that had existing choice kinds of CSAs where their members would choose preferences, and some of those were software based. So again, there is software that can help deal with that, that's been written for CSAs and could easily be adopted for this, really, which is kind of a type of CSA with some different parameters and pickup site.
I'll expand on the software platforms question. This is Julia Van Solen Kim with UC Cooperative Extension in California. And what we found was that most of the farmers and retailers really preferred low-tech options. So I think the tech platforms for managing orders would be great from the customer perspective, but from the farmers and retailers that we were working with, most seem to prefer really low tech. Even like Google Spreadsheet was a little high tech for the majority of our farmers to record the sales data. And so what we did, I think, at most sites was just a paper order slip where the customer would fill out one side and rip it in half and retain the other side as a reminder of their order. And then at the end of the order week, the retailer could just call in, or the farmer would call in and say, okay, you've got 5 or you've got 10 orders, or take photos of those order slips and text them to the farmer. So it was very low tech, and I think to the extent that this model is rolled out across a larger consumer market, then obviously high tech options would be more important.
I think Julie makes a great point there too, which is that it really has to work. Whatever it is, it has to work for the partnership, and that actually is the whole magic of the whole thing, and the consumers as well. Yeah, the software Harvey, some people know about the software Harvey, which is a custom CSA pack software. I was just trying to remember the name, but that's, some of our farms in Vermont use that. And if the farmer is tech savvy enough and works that way, and it works, it could be great, but it also is not the only way.
We have a few more questions coming in through the Q&A and also the chat box. I'll start with the ones in Q&A. Is there any information about whether the retailers got additional sales when the consumer came in to get the box?
Wait, is that part of the findings? I know that in Washington State, there didn't seem to be a bump in sales, but there was some bump, but I don't know how significant it was.
Yeah, so that's something that came across in the postseason interviews. So a lot of times the retailers were really busy and they weren't able to track the additional sales like that we would have liked as researchers, but also for their liking as well. I do know that there were additional sales made that were on minor items for some of the stores. But what we found is that those additional sales, like the new foot traffic, where maybe new customers came into the store as a result of the food box, those customers didn't necessarily follow through on purchases after the food box was done for the season. But there were some additional sales as well.
The next question is, was there any other way than the whiteboard for customers to know what was available?
And this is Diane from Washington State. Yes, I posted the offerings on our Facebook page for 2 of the farms in the valley. And so they, yeah, actually all 3 of the farmers, I would post their offerings, and then the Facebook followers would then go to the store and purchase.
Yeah, I was going to echo that. And one farmer actually made some PDFs for a while that they sent to the retailer, you know, like a paper sheet. But Facebook was the main one, and also farm website, a couple of examples of that.
Another question from the chat box is, how did the retailer / farmers, the pairs, identify consumers to target for marketing emails and mailings, etc.? How did they develop an email listing? How did they identify ways to contact the consumers to actually reach the target demographic group that they were marketing to?
I'll start with that, and this is Julia again in California. So one of the strengths of the model is that the retailers are located right in the community, seeing the volume of shoppers day in and day out, and they know many of the shoppers. And so with the retailers that I worked with, they really talked up the project and the sales opportunity to those customers who they thought would be interested. And so it was a direct personal connection. It wasn't so much mass email lists, but that face-to-face sort of friendly sales pitch of like, hey, here's a flyer. I'm offering this new thing in my store if you're interested. And then they'd slip it in the customer's grocery bag. The other thing that we did was the mass mailing to all of the addresses around the stores. And that was really, really effective at drumming up sales, but it was not so cost effective in terms of the total cost of the mailing and the total number of box orders. So while it was effective in some regards, it wasn't necessarily a model that individual farmers would choose to pay for out of pocket. From that initial like burst of sales that we got from doing the mailing, that's how we developed the email list for using subsequently.
I think that's a great question that came in on the chat box, and you know, if it's who I think it might be asking that question, it really depends on the situation. If you're in a rural area where, okay, let's say you're a small farm trying to access new markets and you're along a rural corridor where you've got people actually doing daily commutes. The short answer, I think, is really close observation, thinking about who's in the area, where they're stopping, what's the time, the time they're stopping, and then starting to, like, if you're going to really do this right, building relationships, and it may be, you know, putting out either some samples of the people where you think you might capture, you know, 20 regular customers or something like that on some route, you know, at a convenience stop and getting their email list, you know, like that kind of thing. Talking to the retailer who knows the customers, really asking them. It really depends. There's not a real stock answer except really close observation and building relationships and thinking carefully about how to interface with people that might be interested.
That's it for questions at the moment, which gives us just enough time to talk about the short course. Wei Wei, are you talking about this slide?
I think Hans would be the best person to speak about on the short course, but just very quickly, we have open registration for the short course starting in early February, as you can see. And you can go to www.farmfreshfoodbox.org to sign up. And there's a little description here. I think most everyone who is on this call has already signed up. Hans, would you like to say anything else about the short course?
Sure. I'm excited about the short course. And the reason is that, you know, over the past couple of years, this wasn't a huge, we didn't test this with thousands of farms and we don't have all the right answers. We learned a lot of lessons, some of them hard lessons. And in the process, I think we put our heads together to think about you know, a way to go about doing, you know, developing this market. It does take work. It takes relationship building, and it takes some commitment. I mean, those are some of the things we really learned. And what this short course is an opportunity to kind of kick yourself a little, and a retailer go through this process, do the research. We have action templates, we've got stories, we've got, you know, nuggets of, you know, lessons learned from the research, and it's wide open in terms of building a market like this. You know, what kind of marketing do you want to do? What's the customer like? Do you want to go the tech version? You know, who's out there? What are your existing markets? All of that, you'll have a chance in these 3 sessions, hour-and-a-half sessions, to kind of work through. They're spread out over time. So by the end of the, you know, end of March, hopefully, you're positioned to give this market a test. And it's just I think it's a great way with a bunch of people, you know, interested, like-minded farmers who are really sort of venturing into this. It's a great chance to get together and go through a good process to test this out. So that's the main thing. And, you know, I do want to say this requires work. It is not, people do not go into a convenience store expecting to be able to buy some really great fresh produce. It's not what they're expecting. And they are used to produce, salad. They got to spend under a certain price point, you know, $3, $5, like anything more than that. It doesn't even matter what the box is. It's not in our culture to do that. So it's about building relationships, building expectations, and doing it with a committed partner. And it's you know, I think there's a lot of potential here, and it takes some commitment. And this short course series is sort of a chance to be able to do that with some structure. That's my pitch.
Thanks, Hans. And so I think that brings us to the conclusion of our webinar. Thank you all for joining us. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me at wwang@uvm.edu, and I can forward your questions to the right player in our team. So again, thank you so much. I will be posting the recording of the session on our website, but I will also be sending the recording to all of you once we have everything processed. So thank you again very much, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and weekend.